In a prior video, we showed you how to get to the buyer broker agency agreement and related documents in BrokerMint to set up a file. We're actually going to go through those documents now in more detail because you'll need to be able to explain these documents to your clients and have them understand what they're agreeing to. We're going to look at these actually in the order that they should be signed by your clients. In fact, it's the order that they'll receive them through BrokerMint. And this order is established by a combination of law and practices required by the state of Utah. So the first document they'll receive is the affiliated business arrangement disclosure. This document is required to be signed regardless of whether or not your clients actually choose to do business with either of the companies listed on this disclosure. But we are required to disclose that Prime Real Estate Experts has an ownership interest in Real Advantage Title Insurance Agency. They actually have two separate amounts. The amount doesn't really matter. What they need to understand is that if they choose to use Real Advantage Title, we receive no financial benefits from that, and they are not required to use Real Advantage Title. They can use any title company they choose to. We recommend Real Advantage Title because they are familiar with our systems, and we have a working relationship that makes many things easier for getting through to settlement and closing, but they are not required to use Real Advantage Title. If they want to shop around for title insurance and title uh, other title services, they are open to do that. We also have to indicate that we have a prior or small ownership in Ultimate Home Lending or UHL. Again, that we receive no financial compensation if they choose to work with a lending officer from Ultimate Home Lending. We simply have to disclose that we have an ownership interest. We do recommend they work with UHL, but they can choose any lender that they choose to work with, and therefore these have to be signed. Now, let's go through the documents you're more familiar with. The buyer broker agency agreement disclosure. Obviously, the company name, your name, and your client's names. And you can put as many clients' names on there as you need to. Keep in mind, you need to put anybody that's going to be on the ultimate buying contract on there. One person, two people, however many people. If it's an LLC or a trust, then it needs to be in the name of the company, the LLC, or the trust. And we will need to have copies of those trust or LLC documents for title in order to complete the work. And the individuals then who will be signing it have to have proof that they have power to sign. So keep that in mind. Sometimes that name could get kind of sloppy and messy. Um, but it has to be what the legal name is going to be on the documents. The term of the agreement begins as soon as everyone signs it. This is the one time that on this document that we put a date that is not today's date. This is the expiration date. This is the date through which it will work. It will be active. Keep in mind, if you accidentally put today's date on there, then you are, in a sense, signing a contract that's valid until 5 o'clock at the end of today's date, which has been mistakenly done in the past and has caused problems for agents, none of ours, but other agents. So keep that in mind. The length of this is negotiable. Now, one aspect of this is to keep in mind that once someone goes under contract, this remains active. So say you sign this for somebody for a 3 month period and they go find a new construction home that's going to take 4 months to complete. You don't have to amend this to keep it active while they go through the rest of the buying process on that home, as long as they have an active contract. Now, if they were to cancel that contract and this was expired, you'd want to amend it and extend the date. But as long as they have an active underbuy all the way up through acquisition or settlement and closing, then this is active. Okay. Located only within Now, one trick we teach people to put is any county in Utah. Say you were to put only within Salt Lake County. They tell you, your buyer tells you, I'm just interested in looking in the Salt Lake area. And then they find this home they really like, and it happens to be in Tooele. Well, now you get to go sign another buyer broker agency agreement or amend this to include Tooele County. So to save time, if you put any county, then it's valid in any county in Utah and you can take them wherever they want to go. Because as we know, buyers oftentimes see a home they like somewhere else or located only at. This can be used for a specific property. Um, a common occurrence for that is at an open house, you're hosting an open house, buyer comes through, you represent seller, buyer wants you to write an offer for them, but only on this house. And then you go through the process of limited agency, which will be a separate video. Um, but you go ahead and write the offer. But this is the only house they want you to show them. They're really just kind of, kicking tires, whatever reason. But this is the house they want to see. Keep in mind that if they choose to, hey, we really like the experience out of you, let's go see other houses, you're not going to have to get a new one or amend this to broaden your scope. Okay. This is incumbent upon the buyer's agent to ask. We will ask multiple times. We'll ask lots of ways to verify whether or not they actually have a signed buyer agency agreement with any other agencies. However, we have no way of verifying that. There's no way to look on the MLS. There's no way to call every brokerage to say, hey, by the way, are you working with Train and McTrain, Face, and Stoppy Caboose? We are doing our best due diligence is to ask repeatedly whether or not they're working with someone else. If they choose to misinform us, we've done our duty, we're going to move forward. Now, if they do say, well, I did go look at, this house with another agent, I was at an open house and they made me sign a form for that house, or whatever reason they give you, we need to make sure we exclude that house from this buyer agency agreement because otherwise it could actually put that potential buyer into a position that they don't understand. That if they go buy that house with us that they saw with another agent, that other agent could eventually either sue our brokerage for compensation or could turn and sue that particular buyer for compensation. And now the buyer's got to pay a double commission. So they need to understand that they need to be truthful with us that if they have seen another home and signed something with someone else in the past, we need to know that because I don't want to put them in that position of having to pay a double commission. And I definitely don't want to put the brokerage and myself in the position of being sued and lose the commission for helping them buy a house they saw with someone else and signed an agreement about. Brokerage fee, and I'm going to harp on this a lot. You're going to see this on this end of the listing agreement. You're going to see it on the REPSI. You're going to see this in a lot of forms. Under the current practice, whatever brokerage fee you put here, up to and including the amount you put here is what you can receive. So the dollar amount, if you're working with a transaction coordinator and you are the one paying the transaction coordinator out of the, then if you don't want to have to pay it out of your commission split, put the $400 or $500, whatever amount you're going to collect from your buyer to cover the transaction coordinator fee. If you're in the Phoenix program on levels 1 and 2, that comes out of your split. Once you move beyond those and you're working more independently, you may choose to either pay it out of your commission or you can actually add that on there and have the buyer understand they're going to be paying for that service as well. And whatever percentage of the gross acquisition price. Whatever that total is all you can get. If you put 2% of the gross acquisition price and then surprise, in the course of putting an offer on a property, find out that the seller has already agreed to offer a 3% buyer agent commission. Under this contract, you can only receive 2%. So you would have to go back and amend this. And the concern with making multiple amendments to this for specific properties is that in the course of the settlement in 2024, one of the things the Department of Justice was looking for was are agents manipulating these agreements over and over and over to match whatever compensation is being offered on a particular property. In other words, put this at the maximum amount that you that you can negotiate with your buyer that your buyer can't handle paying in the event the seller is not paying the compensation, and then leave it there. You can always receive less than that amount, but you can't go over that amount. And if you're constantly manipulating that amount back and forth, it's going to be a red flag to investigators that you are trying to manipulate the system. And keep in mind that whatever amount that is there needs to be something that the buyer can't handle in the event that seller's not paying the compensation. Okay. Having said that, satisfaction of brokerage fee by a third party. This is where we explain to them that the seller may offer a commission amount for you to represent them as the buyer. That amount is negotiable. It is now a part of the purchase contract, the REPSI. We'll go over that on the reps. We'll go over the REPSI individually, but that amount is negotiable between buyer and seller. It is not negotiable between agent and agent. If the buyer is under contract here to pay you 3%, the seller's offering 2%, the buyer wants to try to get the seller, that third party, to make up the difference, they're going to have to negotiate it through the REPSI. But it can be paid by a third party. This, by the way, is incumbent upon VA buyers. Historical practice has been that VA buyers could not pay uh, a buyer brokerage commission outside of settlement. So say they bought a home, seller didn't offer any kind of commission. As the agent, I had this happen to me. I didn't get paid. The lender realized after the fact that they approved the loan they shouldn't have, because the contract said that the buyer would be paying my commission out of pocket after the transaction was over. Didn't get paid. I lost money on the deal. The VA now allows that to happen. However, for that to happen, if you're working with VA buyers and some FHA lenders are requiring this now, they are requiring a copy of your buyer broker agency agreement to verify that the amount of compensation that their buyer is paying out of contract or out of closing settlement as an additional settlement cost matches what's in the contract. So keep that in mind. Okay, protection period. This again it goes back to the old practice of procuring cause. But if I take a buyer through a home and I show them the home and we start the process of buying it and they decide they don't want to buy it and then this expires and they go and buy that same property with someone else, this is what puts them in that situation. They could be responsible to paying me the amount that I should have received because they went off and bought it with someone else. I could choose to go sue that other brokerage. That's going to take time and money. And in case you think this does not happen, we have an agent in our brokerage who had one of their clients that they had registered with the new construction, talked with the builder's representative, which is very important. This becomes very important with new construction because in most builders, if you are not there with the buyer on the first time through or haven't registered with them as their agent, the buyer is going to exclude you from compensation because that's the way the contract is written. One of our agents had a client go behind her back to the builder, told the builder over and over and over and over and over, no, I'm not working with an agent. Builder working on good faith, completed the offer paperwork. This particular buyer then asked the agent, hey, there's this house that we've been interested in. She followed up to find out the home was available and had gone through a price reduction, called the lender to verify if they could still qualify to buy the other home. Lender says, well, I thought you knew they were under contract with this new construction. Buyer had gone behind their agent's back, gone unrepresented to the builder who they were already registered with. That agent and the builder are now have some friction there, but the major friction is with our agent's own client who violated the protection period. Actually violated the whole terms of this in terms of going somewhere else, but they're protected because she was the one who initiated the relationship. Okay, buyer representations and disclosures. Buyer needs to understand that there are certain things we're going to be asking them during the course of this process, that they be honest and truthful. I have an obligation of being honest and truthful to them. As an agent, I also have an obligation of being honest and truthful to whoever the seller is that we're working with. If my buyer lies to me, and I relay that information to the other side, I could be liable. But ultimately, they're responsible for being truthful. Now, this is also some um, protections for you. Exercise care and diligence in evaluating the physical and legal condition of the property. This is why we recommend inspections, but be smart about when you're walking through a home. Hold harmless the company against any claims resulting in injuries while inspecting any property. Be smart when you're walking through the home. This is one reason why quite frequently in the wintertime we'll take shoes off so you're not walking around in wet shoes and slipping and sliding. If you're going to go see bare dirt, don't wear high heels. Be aware of the type of property you're walking through. This is where the contract incorporates the exclusive buyer broker agency agreement, buyer due diligence checklist, and wire fraud disclosure. If you do not have those three documents and the affiliated business disclosure, you do not have a valid completed buyer broker agency agreement. And this is also where it puts it incumbent upon the buyer to disclose if they have seen other properties with another agent. Now, this is the part that we'll cover more in depth on a separate video as we go over the limited agency agreement. But this is where we have to explain to a client that our fiduciary responsibility to them is to represent them honestly and truthfully, and we have a responsibility of loyalty to them as long as the instructions they give us are legal and ethical. If they ask me to do something that is not legal or not ethical, I have no obligation to complete those instructions. In the situation of a limited agency can occur in a brokerage in one of two ways. Way number one, you represent seller and buyer in the same transaction. If you already represent the seller, which is the most common situation, and a buyer comes to you and asks if you would help them write an offer on the property, buyer has to understand that you represent the seller and that the seller has to give written permission to the buyer for you to represent both and be in between. That's the limited agency agreement we'll go over in a separate video. The seller agrees to let you represent themselves still, and the buyer, that limited agency agreement is written. Both sides agree to it. Now you represent both sides in the transaction. That creates a difficulty legally under the responsibilities of loyalty, ethic, and confidentiality because now you know what's going on in both sides. And consequently, the courts have held that you have a responsibility of neutrality to both parties. You'll know everything about the seller. You probably been working with them for a while. You know what's going on with the buyer. If you know negative information about either of those parties, you cannot share it with the other party. Now, the other way that this occurs and does occur frequently in the brokerage is you represent the seller. You tell everybody in brokerage meeting, I've got this listing, bring your buyers. My sellers would love to get an offer. I represent the buyer. I take the buyer in, buyer sees your seller's house. You know what? You were right. My buyer wants to buy your house. Because we are both independent contractors with the same brokerage, Prime Real Estate Experts, we have a limited agency relationship at the brokerage level instead of individual agent level. In order to help facilitate that, we actually go a step beyond what the minimum requirements are. The biggest benefit, one of your biggest benefits in working with Prime Real Estate Experts is that we have three brokers here. Craig Whiting as owner, Marty McKay, as the principal broker, and myself, Darren Webster, as the branch broker. So if anytime we have two agents in the brokerage, one who represents seller and one who represents buyer, each agent is assigned to work with a specific broker to help answer any questions that client would have. So you can have an open and free dialogue with the broker to answer those questions. The other side can have an open and free dialogue with the other side. And then if at any time you two need to have a conversation, you make sure that the broker you're assigned to work with is with you to make sure that that neutrality at the brokerage level is maintained, but also so that you don't disclose more than you should, that you really are maintaining the confidentiality that is required. Now, I've done this before within the brokerage. It happened to occur that I had a buyer that was interested in a listing that Marty had. And anytime we would talk about that specific transaction, we would always do it in the presence of another party. And that other party happened to say it was the funniest thing they'd watch because Marty and I could be joking around and 1 minute, having a Nerf gun war, whatever, have a conversation with our client, and would walk in and say to the other one, I am coming to you as the agent representing me as the buyer or Marty the seller. And the other one would acknowledge, I am now speaking to you as the agent representing the other party. And they said the relationship suddenly got very, very formal because we were doing everything we could not to breach the confidentiality of our clients or put them in any situation that could negatively impact their ability to complete the transaction. If you were looking, if you know you walk in a situation where you could be working with limited agency and have not done that before, please contact me and we'll talk through that process for you. But I always explain this, regardless of whatever actually happens with my clients, I always explain that that's the level we take it to because it is, we hold ourselves to a very high professional standard. That professional standard actually exceeds the level that is expected as minimum performance or guidelines by the state of Utah and the Division of Real Estate, primarily because most brokerages have a principal broker and that's it. They don't have another broker you could work with. Professional advice, this is the easy one. I'm here to help you buy a house. That's it. That's my expertise. I know about houses. I can offer you some insights about the home, and it's incumbent upon me to show you if there's any material defects. But if you have questions about specific aspects of the home, get an inspector, get a specialist. I know people. If you have questions about how this affects your taxes, talk to an accountant. If you have questions about the contract, talk to a lawyer. Talk to the professionals who are trained in those specific areas. Dispute resolution. Occasionally, a dispute between you and your client may arise over the terms of this contract. Probably the most common would be the they get under contract for purchasing a property and then suddenly and then realize, oh wait, my agent explained to me that it's a 3%, but the seller's only paying 2%. What's going to happen over that other 1%? Ideally, that we'll work that out at the brokerage level. If that doesn't occur and they choose to go forward with mediation, shall or may is the choice here. It's up to you and your client which they prefer. Do they prefer to immediately go to a professional mediator or do you make it optional? They need to understand the steps are we'll work it out at the brokerage level first. Second, professional mediator, where both sides agree to share the cost of having a professional mediator come in and meet with both sides and come up with a written resolution. Mediation is a non-binding agreement. That means one of the two parties could walk away from it after spending the money on it. If mediation fails, and under National Association of Realtor guidelines, it is a violation of the Code of Ethics to not go to mediation first. In other words, they're trying to avoid litigation. Because if mediation doesn't work, then you go to arbitration, where you bring in a paid professional arbiter, and that document is a legal binding document that both sides are, if both sides agree to it, both are required to uphold. If arbitration fails, then it goes to litigation and the lawyers and the courts get involved. Those are the levels of escalation. Obviously, we prefer to deal with it at the brokerage level. Very rarely does it get to the litigation stage, but it could. In that event, number 8 says if it gets to the legal litigation stage, both sides are responsible for paying their own legal costs up front, and then the courts may choose to order the non-prevailing party, the losing side, to pay the legal costs, reasonable legal costs of the prevailing party. Buyer authorizations. Buyer authorizes us to disclose to the MLS the terms of the purchase upon completion. And they need to understand that we do this simply for the use of that MLS data for other agents as well as appraisers to have clear and accurate data about sales in the state of Utah for valuation of properties in the future. This is not reported to the state. Utah is a non-reporting state. We do not tax the transfer of property. So the amount that gets recorded on their deed of trust with the county is only the loan amount of the property, not if that loan amount is different from the actual purchase amount, then it's different. If it's a cash purchase, the typical deed of trust will simply say $10 in due and good consideration. So the amount is not recorded at all on what they paid for the property on that. $10 or and good consideration is the way that most deeds are worded. The second part of this is earnest money is held at the brokerage. If the brokerage has an interest-bearing account, the interest earned on earnest money is not the property of the brokerage or the buyer because it's held in trust and is turned over to the Utah Association of Realtors Housing Opportunity Fund um, for grants throughout the state of Utah. We choose not to have an interest-bearing account on the trust account for prime real estate experts, so we don't have to deal with this aspect of it every month. You can put additional attachments to this. As was mentioned, when you create the initial brokerment package, there is a pre-written addendum available that if you want to attach it, it simply states, in the event that you choose to cancel this for any reason, you simply pay me X amount of money for my time and my brokerage's time, and we agree to allow walk away. That's up to you if you choose to add that. If there are additional properties, remember up here where we could list where there were properties, they said, well, yeah, by the way, I've been busy shopping around with other agents. You may have to exclude more than one or two, and there's not enough lines, you can do that. Whatever attachments you need to add. Equal housing, we're going to follow the equal housing laws. Electronic counterparts, they need to understand that anything written that is sent by email, fax, any kind of electronic transmission counts as an original copy, including the fact that we use digital signatures. Okay, due on sale. This is in both the buyer and the seller representation because the buyer needs to understand that when a seller sells a property that has an underlying mortgage on the property, either a primary or a home equity loan of credit or any kind of home equity loan, anything that's been secured by that property, those instruments all include a due on sale clause that if the property sells, that amount is due, the remaining value of the debt is immediately due to the lender. Now, why does a buyer need to understand that? Because sellers are starting to look more toward doing seller finances, buyer looking more toward doing buyer financed deals in an effort to get a better interest rate. So a seller bought a home 6 years ago and had a 3% interest rate. They're ready to move up. Then they've got a 6% interest rate and a killer payment because housing prices were 50 to 60% lower 6 years ago. So they say, here's the deal, Mr. Buyer, you come in, you pay us a down payment for the equity amount. And then we're going to write a contract that the amount that you pay each month now as the new homeowner is covers the mortgage. And, heck, I want to make some money on this too. So a couple $100 more. And then through a title company, you make a payment to the title company each month. That title company then sends the money to the lender. So the lender gets paid and the balance goes to me as the seller. And we do a seller finance. And you now own the home, but the mortgage is still technically in my name and is still for those original terms. Well, that made sense when interest rates were stayed fairly consistent, but we had a 4 year, 3 or 4 year period where interest rates were artificially low, 2%, 3%. And so now buyers are trying to buy into that situation, and lenders are looking at it going, wait a minute, this seller just sold the house. There's a change on the deed, there's a change of ownership. They still owe us all this money at a really ridiculously low interest rate that we can lend out at a higher rate. No, we want it all now. And they could call the whole note due. They notify the original homeowner, say, we're calling your note due. We noticed you've changed ownership of the property. You now owe us that entitled balance plus any other fees that could be charged. That seller then now has turned around the buyer and say, hey, guess what? My bank found out and they've called the note due, so I've got to have all the money from you now instead of whatever terms they'd worked out on a balloon payment at the end of a certain amount of time. So you better run out and get financing really fast, or I have to take the house back because the bank's gonna or the bank could take it away from me. Your buyer needs to know that that's a risk with seller finance now. That lenders are there was a long period of time when lenders really weren't following up on it because interest rates have been fairly consistent. There wasn't a much difference between 5 and 6%, but when they loan it out at 2% and can now loan it out at almost 6.5%, they want the money back. Entire agreement. This is exactly what it sounds like. This form plus the buyer due diligence, the wire fraud, and the uh, affiliated business. That's all you're going to be signing. Okay. And then obviously signatures. It does not become active until all the buyers have signed. Now, this is kind of tricky. You notice there's two buyer lines. What happens if you have more than two buyers? I've had it happen. Easy. You just stick another line in there. put a text box underneath of it with the buyer, where stick a signature line and put a text box underneath of it, put buyer's signature and keep going. Buyer's address, this form has not been updated for that. This is an older, this harks back to the days when you had to have some way to verify that they had received receipt of it by address and phone number. Digital communication now counts. Again, buyer's signatures with the digital signatures are date and time stamped. You can add a separate date and time stamp over here if you want. It's active when all the buyers and you as the authorized buyer's agent have signed this. Okay, this is the long form. Buyer due diligence checklist. They need to understand that this is a checklist. This is a list of all the things that they can during their due diligence period check about the condition of the home. And this is just a checklist. There may be other things they choose to look at, but these are some recommendations. Making sure that the home is in compliance with building and zoning. That's their job to check into. If they have questions about how to do that, we can help point them to the right direction. Easiest way is to simply Google the county and go, or the area, usually by city. So Sandy City Planning and Zoning Commission, find their contact information, say contact these people. Rental of the property. If they intend to use it as a rental, they need to understand what the requirements are. HOAs oftentimes have very restrictive requirements. There's a limit on how many rentals they can have. HOAs will limit the number of rentals because it can adversely affect their ability to take VA and FHA loans if they have too many rentals within the community. They'll also have very restrictive rules about short-term rentals. The other residents don't want to be bothered by people Airbnb in the neighbor's house. Many communities throughout Utah, in an effort to try to make more homes available to primary owners, have begun to restrict the ability to use properties legally as a short-term rental. So it's up to the buyer's responsibility, if they're intending to use this as a rental of any kind, to find out what the rental requirements are. Duplexes or non-conforming, particularly non-conforming duplexes with an upper and a lower, where the lower is listed as a mother-in-law apartment. Many areas may require that the homeowner live on the one level and they can rent out the other, but they can't rent out both at the same time. So they've got to find out what those requirements are. Hazardous waste and toxic substances, they can have the home checked if there's toxic waste. Seller has to confirm that they are not aware of any toxic waste. Builders also have to verify that they did not bury all their junk in your backyard somewhere. Now, again, hazardous substances, if you've ever looked under their kitchen sink, most of what's under there qualifies as hazardous waste. But this is if you were to go in later and find that somebody had been pouring oil directly into the ground in the backyard after changing the oil in their car, which we used to do around here. And now there's a big oil slick in the backyard. They've got to be aware of that. Radon gas. We always recommend radon be tested, even in in fact, especially in new construction. Radon gas is a poisonous gas that is given off as a result of the decomposition of shale, which is very common underneath the sand in most of our state. It seeps into the home through porous areas in the foundation, typically around where pipes come in. The foundations themselves, concrete is porous. The gas seeps in, it's heavier than air, it concentrates in the basement, and it can cause long-term health effects. One reason we recommend new construction be tested is because once that home is built, it's created a giant capsule for the radon to get into the basement, not out. And when they dig up the soil, that releases a lot of that gas that's been trapped in the soil. So we recommend radon gas, and it's a 3-day test. If the home tests above acceptable letters, which is 4 picocuries per liter on average over a 48-hour period, then mitigation systems can be put in, and they're not expensive. They're between $1,000 and $3,000, depending on the size of the home. Survey and staking. If they want to have a surveyor come out and verify the property lines. Most existing homes, people just take it on faith that where the fence line is the property line. You'd be surprised. I was dealing with a 100-year-old property that had been in the same family for 100 years. Grandpa had never really worried about where the neighbors put up fences. We went in, got the plat map, and every fence down one whole side of the house, 5 houses in a row, because it was a deep lot. It was a full acre deep. Every house on the one side of the property line, the fences were in the wrong place. And the lender said, you got to either move those fences or get an agreement to just give up that. And then, you're going to lose value. So survey, raw land should be surveyed to verify where corners are. New construction typically has the survey pins in the corner of the property. And if it's just a regular lot, you can assume it goes straight back. But if you're in an irregular shaped lot, they'll oftentimes still have the construction markers. But again, you can have it surveyed. Home warranty plans. Home warranty plans cover the wear and tear items in the home. This is not homeowners insurance. If your dishwasher in the middle of the night goes diddly poop and piddles all over the floor, leaks and damages the kitchen floor, and it rains down into the basement, homeowners insurance will cover the water damage, won't cover the dishwasher. But if you're using the dishwasher and notice it starts making a funny noise and isn't doing its job right, and you turn the dishwasher off and you call the home warranty company, they have a repairman come out and check the dishwasher and determine either repair or replace. The hot water heater starts making funny noises and isn't making hot water. You turn the water off, call the home warranty company, they come out and check and get it taken care of before the bottom blows out and you have a big massive flood in the basement. Okay. Flood zone and insurance. There are areas in Utah that are set aside as active flood zones under the Housing and Urban Development. The lender will be looking into that. It will require that they have additional insurance, and it can be pretty expensive. Areas along active waterways, there are some areas that you'd be surprised. It may seem like they wouldn't be in a flood zone. My very first home was technically in a flood zone. It was a condo right next to City Creek and Murray, right as it goes into the park. We laughed because we were on the second floor and said it's going to have to take a lot of water to get there, but it was a condo. If City Creek ever flooded, all of those condos would share the cost and the expense of repair. And our second year there, we had record snowfall, and there were sandbags all the way along both sides of the creek as it came through the middle of the complex. So be aware of that. There are areas in Weber County where homes have been built very close to the Weber River, oftentimes built during drought stages when the river's low, and then we have one wet year, you could get flooded. Okay. Homeowners insurance. Buyers are typically going to be, if there's any kind of underlying loan, are going to be required to have homeowners insurance to protect the property. If they're not buying it that way, if they're paying cash, it's up to them whether or not they choose to maintain homeowners insurance. It's a good practice to have it. They're going to need to shop for that. Title issues, homeowners insurance. Title company's going to run a title search and immediately send a report if there's any issue, if they notify or notice any concerns. They'll also the seller is obligated to provide the covenants, codes, and restrictions and HOA documents. Title can find the CC&Rs, the covenants, codes, and restrictions, but notes on minutes and budgets of that they may not have. This is an important way to find out if there's any upcoming assessments. One of our sellers currently has a property. One of our agents has a property listed that there was massive roof damage done, and the homeowners insurance had to contract out for the repairs, and they were all just notified that they're getting hit with like a $17,000 assessment to replace the roof on all these buildings. Buyer, needs to know that, because if they buy that and the assessment's unpaid, they just bought into the debt, and that could negatively impact their ability to qualify. Seller may end up having to pay it off at settlement because the buyer can't afford to. Physical condition, of course, having the inspected by a certified inspector. Having your father-in-law go look at it and kick a couple of walls and look on, get his flashlight out and look under the sink. This is a certified inspector. We always recommend a certified inspector. They can have the square footage and acreage checked. An appraiser is going to measure the square footage, but they can, pay for their own, have that double checked. Find out about utility services. The seller property condition disclosures requires the sellers indicate who the utility services are, but they may contact to find out those utility companies to find out what average costs are. In the event that it's on water, most of the homes you're going to deal with are just going to be on local culinary water. Occasionally, you're going to run into a well situation or something with water rights. You need to verify the transferability of the water rights. If it's water shares, such as irrigation water, the shares can be withheld by the seller and sold separately. If it's water rights, rights to use water in the ground for a well, culinary well that provides water to the home, those automatically transfer because that's the water source. And I've had two wells that had to be dealt with. Both times also required that the lender required the well be certified as being clean. Geological conditions, they have the right to have the property tested to make sure there aren't any drainage problems, wetlands, anything's going to come up that way. Um, Many of you are familiar with the news. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, late 2023, we had a couple of homes fall off the hill up on South Mountain, where the builder had done everything that the county had told him to do to stabilize the hill, requested permission to build up there. Draper City approved it because they'd done everything they were told to do. And then we had 2.5 years worth of snow in one winter. The ground became super saturated. All of the work they'd done to stabilize the hill collapsed because the hill had been shaped like this and they'd squared it up to build on it. Everything collapsed and dragged two houses off the hill. Okay. It becomes an issue of liability at that point in time. If it's bare land and they're looking to build on it, then there are additional tests that need to be done to verify if there's wetlands, if there's going to be any drainage problems. They can have a perk test done to see if they can actually build on the property. We always tell people to have mold inspection done, even on new construction. Mold is going to be endemic. This is checking places besides just kitchen and bathroom where it's pretty common. But even new construction, materials get left outside, they get wet. The home's being built year round. There's potential for mold. They can check the area for any kinds of nuisances. But again, it's up to their responsibility. But we also are going to remind them that we're going to show all homes in accordance with fair housing requirements. Now, this is also incumbent upon sellers. Sellers can't tell me, well, you can show it to anybody except this particular group, particularly if it's a protected group of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, familial status, and in Utah, source of income. Property taxes, the buyer can find out about property taxes. Occasionally, you may run into one that's in a greenbelt status. Greenbelt is a specialized status in agricultural land where the land that the agricultural land is taxed at a much lower rate than it is as a residential, or that it's taxed, but they get a rebate each year as long as they keep it in green. Well, those rebates add up over time. And now if someone else comes in and buys the property, they may be responsible for paying back all those rebates that have been received. Public infrastructure districts, these are becoming more popular with new construction. PIDs are where a builder buys a big chunk of land. It's become very expensive to put in all the required infrastructure, sewer, water, gas, electric, roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, all those kind of things that add up, that add to the builder's cost, that in recent years made it so expensive that by the time they tried to pass that on as part of one of the fees, the impact fees the buyers had to pay, then the price of the house got so high the buyers couldn't afford the home. So the state of Utah now allows the builder, whoever has 100% ownership of the property, to incorporate a public infrastructure district, which is a bonding district that then issues bonds that investors can purchase, that district then has to pay back over time, like any bond, as part of the property tax. Once they sell typically 60% of the developed property. So the developer is now a minority owner in the district. That district is then taken over by the property owners, just like an HOA, and they're responsible for making sure that those bonds get paid off. But that does mean property tax in those areas could be higher. You could go, behind your fence line, the neighbor's house that was already there could have a much lower property tax rate because they're not paying off this bond that was taken out to put in curb and gutter and everything else. Of course, income tax, talk to your attorneys. Foreign investment in real property. This is if the buyer or seller are a foreign entity or someone who is not here on a full-time legal status, have to disclose. So if a student came here from China and their parents bought them a condo to live in while they were here, their parents live out of country, they are a foreign entity. That has to be disclosed because at the time of the transfer of the property, So you're buying this property. It turns out the seller is from out of lives out of country and bought it as an investment. Title is required to withhold an estimated amount of taxes on that transfer. And then the IRS comes in and determines how much actually has to be paid. If the amount that was withheld covers what the IRS required, your buyer's okay. If the amount that was withheld, the estimated taxes, doesn't cover what the IRS comes in to take, and the seller can no longer be located, the IRS may come after the buyer for the balance of that tax. Energy efficiency. There are some new construction areas that are certified high efficiency, and your buyer could check with their homeowner's insurance provider to see if there are any kinds of benefits they receive from that. Okay. Now, you'll notice meth wasn't on here. Meth is addressed in the property condition disclosures, as in they have to disclose one out there, nail if there's meth. But under this hazardous waste areas, when I say, look, nationally, it's estimated 1 in 4 homes test positive for meth contamination for the use of methamphetamines or other drugs in the property. It is in your buyer's best interest, especially if they have little children, to test for methamphetamine contamination. The use of meth typically involves smoking it. It produces vapors that are odorless and clear. No, you can't smell a meth house, but the vapors that aren't inhaled then get absorbed by all the porous materials in the home, walls, carpeting, especially carpet pad, furniture, anything in the home that can settle on and sink in. So typical meth tests are done on walls so that we can determine if there is the presence of the use of methamphetamines in the home. If there is, it tests positive, then the buyer and seller have to negotiate how to address that. So please always include meth on there. Mold, meth, radon are the big three. Okay, wire fraud alert disclosure. This basically comes down to don't be stupid with your personal information. One of the reasons we recommend Real Advantage Title is that they use a secure communication system called Qualia, where if your client receives an email from them, it's the email with the link to log into Qualia if there's any information that's being transferred back and forth. All title companies use some variation of Qualia or other forms of companies. If someone receives an email in their email and it has a Gmail extension or Yahoo or something like that, claiming to be the title company, you can guarantee it's a spam. They're trying to steal their information. Scammers will go online. It's very easy to find the logos of companies and try to make their email look like what that title company would send, especially when they're asking for information, wire transfer information about completing a transaction. Information is typically provided at closing. If it's being provided before closing, it's typically done over the phone. If they receive any kind of communication about wire information or title information that they're not sure about, have them call the title or escrow officer whose name they already have. Goes out on an email right at the beginning. It's going to be on every email they do receive from them. Call and verify. If someone calls and asks them for personal information, claiming to be the title company, tell them hang up and call. Okay. This is for your protection at home inspection. This informs them that they have the right to get the home inspected with a trained home inspector. We recommend that they circle yes or no if they're going to do it, or that anyway, we just have to sign that they've read this. This is verification that we told them we recommend you get a home inspection. It's your choice. This is not required by the state. This is to help protect you as an agent. Finally, the last form. This lender authorization form authorizes us to contact the lender to receive copies of information from the lender, particularly a copy of the appraisal, so that we can put a copy of the appraisal in the permanent file. Particularly if there are any appraisal-related issues that come up that need to be addressed, we can have a copy of that. The appraiser the appraisal is only can send it to the lender because the lender has to have it, and the buyer who paid for it because they're the parties that own it. So this saves us having to nag your client about getting it. Okay, those are your standard buyer packet requirements.